Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala barakatuh. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala syarafil anbiya wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Alhamdulillah, we are continuing on our chapter 4 of this book on holistic human behavior and laws of learning. And today I will talk about the nature of conditioning, because this conditioning aspect of psychology developed from behavioral psychology, and before that is developed out of the experiment of Dr. Pavlov. We have this Pavlov experiment on the dog, and then how this has actually spun a huge range of psychology based on propaganda, mass media, perception, tuning, and so many other things, including brainwashing and so on. So in this chapter, Professor Muhammad Mahdi Jenkins was telling us about the simplest kind of learning, that is conditioning. How conditioning affects the simplest type of learning, as well as later on how it affects classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and how it affects the whole human perception and human behavior. So I'll just read a few paragraphs here because it is very long about Pavlov experiment and so on, which I don't need to dwell, but you can read, very interesting. All right. I'll start by describing the simplest kind of learning. Sometimes instead of using the word learning, I'll use the word conditioning. They mean just about the same thing, but in some situations, one term seems to fit better than the other. Something that is really amazed me when I came across the principles of learning is that they have been known for less than 100 years. People have been learning by them and using them to teach others for as long as there have been human beings. So conditioning has been used by human societies since we existed on this earth. So we operate by conditioning. Our tribal system is also conditioning. Our societal system is conditioning. The 21st century is even worse in terms of insane and negative conditioning, which I will explain later. But only during this century did we come to realize that learning took place according to specific laws, just like any other aspect of material existence. So whatever there is in this physical plane, it has a set of laws, whether it's the law of physics, law of chemistry, law of quantum theory, and so on. I think all that exists are sacred, but I don't believe anything that should be considered that is beyond study. The fact that learning takes place according to certain laws was first discovered accidentally while medical experiments were being conducted. Scientists were trying to find out how salvation took place when they were working with a dog and had a mechanism that blew meat powder into the dog's mouth so that they can determine how much saliva the dog has produced with different amount of meat powder. And this is where the beginning of Dr. Pavlov and his team about this experiment and how they discover the laws of conditioning in terms of classical conditioning, which was later developed by Professor B.F. Skinner in terms of operant conditioning and related aspects of conditioning. So in conditioning, there are three words: stimulus, response, and effect. Actually, I should probably also define the word elicit. A stimulus is something that brings about action. In the example we have been talking about, the meat powder is the stimulus. The word elicit means to bring something about or to cause something to happen. The stimulus, meat powder, elicits or bring about salvation, which in this case is the response. So the three words, the stimulus, response, reflex, and elicit. A response is a reaction to or result from a stimulus. The stimulus elicits a response, which in this case is a way of saying that the meat powder causes salvation to take place. The whole process is called a reflex. When a dog gets food in its mouth, it salvates. A reflex is a fixed relationship between the stimulus and a response where it elicits the response. So reflex work in the same way. Candy in the mouth of a child will cause salivation. There are quite a few reflexes. Some are obvious, some take place inside our body, which we aren't aware. For example, when a doctor taps at your knee in the right place with a little hammer, your leg will jerk. This is an example of common reflex. Reflexes are natural response which are elicited by stimuli in the environment. That's the way people and animals are made. Certain things happen to our body, bring about a certain natural response. That is the way our muscles, nerves, and brain are organized. Okay? So later on, he talked about this idea of the classical conditioning, But I want to just discuss further on the aspect of conditioning in terms that we see, because after the discovery of classical conditioning and operant conditioning, the development of behavioral psychology, this is the basis of behavioral psychology. Yeah? All laws of learning on behavior psychology is based on classical and operant conditioning. So the whole idea when this was developed then, the industry, mass media industry, propaganda is used to control perception. So our perception today is largely controlled by the mass media, whether it is online mass media, whether it is radio, television, videos, shows, talk shows, movies. The whole idea of mass media, Facebook, WhatsApp, all this mass media now is being used to control perception. So the control of perception by conditioning, that means using the technology or the know-how of conditioning, both classical, operant, and other methods of the using behavioral psychology and the mode of learning, laws of learning, you are able to control perception. So from conditioning, you develop the technology, or then you develop the control of perception. This is where the negative aspect of psychology comes in, because based on this, they control the mass media, and then they develop propaganda. That's why the very propaganda is used, for example, by the Nazi. He has a whole ministry of propaganda. And Hitler is a very smart man. He uses all this knowledge, control of perception, development of the mass media, have a propaganda, and then develop negative or insane worldview. For example, for the Nazi, it is the Holocaust. That means because of the past problems with the Jewish people, for example, the German people suffer tremendously because of the Jewish oppression and so on. So he says all Jewish people are enemies. And as a result, he started the killing, mass killing of the Jews, but starting with control of perception. All right, then mass media. The same thing is being used by Stalin, by Mao Zedong. All dictators in the world are using the same ideas. In the past, it's very difficult because the tools for mass communication was not there. During the time of the Nazi, they have the radio. They do not have a television there, but it is still very, very powerful. They can use the radio and then reach out to all the German people. Today, the mass media is so powerful that to develop an insane worldview is quite easy. So who controls the world today? The conditioning that we are having now is the 1% of the world. This 1%, 1% of the world's wealthiest people. This 1%, wealthiest people, they control the mass media, they control the propaganda machine, they control the perception of humanity, in a way. So that's why there are many examples of how this 1% is creating a catastrophe in the waiting. That means this human society, because of the extreme greed, because their mantra for this extreme 1% is greed is good. All right? So you all must be greedy, because we are greedy, that's why we are billionaires. That's why we can fly in our private jet, we can have our yachts, we can consume and consume and consume. And consumption is good. So you should consume and consume, regardless what. So the whole economic basis of the 20th and 21st century was based on consumption. How does this become a worldview? This insane worldview is because of this 1% who wants to continue and perpetuate their control of the world, and they use this whole concept of conditioning to condition us, you, me, every child, every human being in this world, like it or not, are being controlled through this unrelenting attack every day of our life. Thousands and thousands of advertisements through the mass media, through the billboard, through whatever means, to control your perception. So your perception also will be then, oh, we must consume, because if we don't consume, the GDP is not going to grow up, and if there's no GDP, then all of us will suffer. Okay, this is their approach. Oh, greed is good because when you are greedy, you can become rich. And when you become rich, you can enjoy life. So this is where so many of the insane and negative worldview comes from conditioning. And this science of conditioning is now so rampant and so sophisticated that literally we cannot find a way out of it unless all of us realize as human beings that we have to change. All right? For example, if we say that this insane worldview of greed is good, now we are destroying the planet. The CO2 level is the highest in more than 650,000 years. All right? The plastic industry, the soft drink industry, the junk food industry, the fast food industry, all these industries are promoting. For example, the cola industry is promoting all kinds of cola filled with fructose, sugar, and so on, causing massive psychological problems among children, ADHD, hyperactivity, and so on. Diabetics, you name it. The junk food industry, the packaging industry, for example, plastics, is insane. We can use, for example, like a bag, a plastic bag, we can replace it with a jute bag, made from natural fiber from Bangladesh. You can give a lot of employment for the Bangladeshi people, and a jute bag will last you for 1 year. You can carry your goods and so on. But no, we have take and throw, take and throw. So the take and throw society is this insane worldview based on consumption, never-ending consumption. All this is dependent on conditioning. So how are we going to get out that conditioning? We have to find a new worldview. That new worldview, for Muslims, we are propounding our positive Islamic psychology, a transcendent model to achieve peace, happiness, and success, so that we can be part of a movement of people, right-thinking people, who can then realize the end of humanity is near. If we continue this insane way of living, we must have a more balanced, holistic way of living, and we must develop holistic human behavior of love, caring, sharing, fairness, justice, and a balanced ecosystem so that all humanity can live in peace and happiness, all creatures on earth can have a fair share, and we can have a good life, not of excesses, not of extreme consumption, not of evil, destructive methods of living, but going back to the basics and using science and technology for the benefit of human beings. Right now we are using the science of psychology in terms of conditioning to create this. What we need to do is realize our difficulties, realize our challenge, and change and use conditioning in a far positive manner, in a way that we can hope to bring a good society in the 21st century. And for Muslims, we know we are the custodian on this earth, the Caliph of Allah on this earth, always striving to make ourselves good, helping others to be good, and making the world good, inshallah.